Hey there, welcome to this radio channel, and this is my first in a series of videos on my favorite shortwave frequencies. Now, this is an idea that came from Tom Stiles from the Hammerhead 88 YouTube channel, and of course, he's keeping me reminded regularly of doing this list. Um, Now, I first wanted to do, well, let's do a big list of frequencies, my favorite frequencies. And then I thought, nah, I don't want to do a big list of frequencies all mixed in. I want to do a list of frequencies depending on what I'm listening to. So this first list is my top international broadcast frequency list. Now, I have to stress out that this does not include and it does not mean necessarily my favorite stations, but more of my favorite frequencies that I tune all the time. International broadcasters change frequency regularly. So I didn't want to do a list now that, for example, in October, it will change because of the frequency changes, or at any time because the station wants to change. These are my favorite frequencies that I tune in probably almost every week and try out regularly, and they have one thing in common. These are international broadcasters that have been using the same frequency for ages. So it means this list, it's been years since they've been using that frequency, and unless something happens, it's probably years to come they'll still be using those frequencies. And that's why I chosen this frequency list. First frequency in my frequency list is Radio Rebelde, Cuba. Radio Rebelde in Cuba, I said here in the comment in red, local evening, because it comes in here in Montreal, east coast of North America, and throughout North America in our local evenings. And it's a interesting stations because it does have tons and tons of really nice Cuban music throughout the evening. So it's an interesting listen for that. It always gives a very good signal through North America. So that's the first one. When I say local evening, anywhere from about, depending on the time of year, from as early as maybe 2200 hours UTC to as late as you want. It's a 24-hour frequency here, so as long as propagation and darkness holds up, it works. Second frequency, Radio Havana, Cuba, on 6000 kilohertz. Now sometimes the modulation isn't great, but it usually packs in a good signal throughout the evening here, 01 to 0700 UT. Has a nice mix of Cuban music. Has some interesting programmings. I like the mailbag. I like the DXers Unlimited from Arnie Caro. That is a little unusual but interesting DX program. And of course some of the sometimes comments. The negative side of Radio Havana Cuba, and I'm gonna say it because that's maybe the thing that I don't like about them, is the way that they just bash a little too much the United States and the different things that happen. And always saying how they've got these war heroes and these people in jail, and it's like, come on, guys. That's 80s propaganda and it doesn't work today. Lighten up and do some more interesting program. You can, say that you're not. I understand that you might be mad at the U.S. for the embargo and everything, but there are different ways of voicing our own things. But apart from that, you know what? It's a nice listen. 6050 kilohertz, HCJB in Quito, Ecuador. The last frequency direct from Ecuador that we can hear in North America. So I've chosen this one for a variety of reasons. It's not always a very strong signal, but I do like tuning in. There's often some nice Ecuadorian music that I always found very beautiful. Also, the fact that It kind of reminds me the good old days of HCJB when they were the powerhouse signal from Quito, Ecuador. So 6050. They're in the evening, North America, so 23 to 05 UT. Try it out. Usually isn't that hard to catch, although it's not super strong all the time. 6070 kilohertz, of course, because it's close to me, CFRX in Toronto, Canada. Sometimes I do like listening, and especially in the afternoon, it's probably one of the best frequencies for CFRX would be the afternoon, early evening here. And, mix of local programs from CFRB Toronto. Sometimes kind of interesting. It's like listening to a local medium wave station, but it does have some interesting programs. 6160 kilohertz, CKZN from St. John's, Newfoundland, Canada. Also, this one is a rather easy catch here in the late afternoons, early evenings. But both are 24 hours, so it can be at any time. In the wintertime, it's almost 24 hours that I get these two frequencies. And this one is the CBC outlet, so it's kind of a reminder of Radio Canada a little bit. And it sometimes is interesting to listen to. 6180 kilohertz Radio Amazonas in Brazil. This is the great signal from 0 to 0800 UT, and it has great Brazilian music to listen to. This has been used for ages, and it continues to be used on that frequency. 7490 kilohertz, good old frequency of WBCQ. Not always easy to listen to, depends on propagation, but 1900 to 0500 UT. I said depends on day because it's not always from 1900 to 05. It depends on the day of the week or weekend. So check out the schedules on the IBI space, for example. Um, I like WBCQ because of its mix of all sorts of very unusual programming, and I that's the side that I like about that station. It's not just a 24-hour Jesus station. It's all of that mixed in. It could be Jesus, it could be anarchy type programming, it could be Alan Wiener worldwide talking about, you know, radio and WBCQ and so on. It's a mix of all sorts of interesting things, and they do say that they want to give a voice to everybody that wants to have a voice. I like that. Two frequencies to note about WBCQ also, 508, 5130 I believe, and 3250 also are two frequencies that you can try for. I think it's 5130. 9580, that is, I was, when I started listening to shortwave when I was about 13, 14 years old, the mornings were Radio Australia 9580 kilohertz. It's still Radio Australia 9580 kilohertz. It's the morning coffee listening for most shortwave listeners in North America. It's the best Radio Australia frequency of all. Great signal all the time. And that's local mornings here in North America. So, 12, 13, 1400 hours UTC. 11580. Nice frequency of WRMI that usually often gives a good signal up here. The reason why I chose this one is because of its various relays of all sorts of programs. Anything from Slovakia to Ukraine to Prague to Radio Northern Ireland to Hobart Radio International. All of that is cool. Also, Glenn Hauser's World of Radio. Everything mixed in there. So when it's not Brother Stare or a Jesus guy, it's interesting. It has interesting programs. 11780, another great powerhouse in the evening here in North America. Radio Nacional Amazonas from Brazil, once again. Great Brazilian music. One of the great listens in the evening. This one, an old frequency that, once again, this 12095 was used when I was probably 12, 13 years old. Still used today. And here in North America, it does give us a good signal usually from 20 to 2200 hours UT, even though it's from Ascension Islands and broadcast to West Africa. For what the BBC World Service is, it ain't the same BBC World Service from 20 years ago, but it's still does have some interesting programs to listen to. I do like listening to NewsHour and have their point of view of different, world events. 13765. That also is a frequency that's been used for ages from Vatican Radio. Usually here, 20 to 21:15 is the time for to listen to Vatican Radio. They have English and French at that time. You know what? Vatican Radio, for a lot of people, I remember a friend of mine saying, "Hey, Vatican Radio, you're listening to the radio, religious stuff from the Pope." And, well, you know what? Vatican Radio isn't just that. It is a surprising news service, especially if you want to learn a little more on what's happening in Africa. They are pretty amazing in their programming for that. So it's surprising what you can get out of Vatican Radio. 15235. This one been used for ages, and it not always is easy to catch, but when it does, it's really nice. Channel Africa, South Africa, 1600 to 1800. 1 hour in English, an hour in French. And this is also interesting for its content of what's happening on the African continent, things that we'll never hear in the local media. So that's a great frequency, and one of the only frequencies that I get from South Africa clear enough to listen to programs. 15300, another old-time frequency. This frequency from Radio France has been used for ages and is still used today. 17 to 2000 hours UT. When I want to listen to the French service of Radio France International, that is the frequency I tune to. That's the one I hear regularly. I was actually listening to 15300 about half an hour ago, so gives you an idea. 15400 BBC World Service. This is another frequency that, if you're in North America, try it out in the afternoons, 17 to 2000 hours UT. It usually gives a good enough signal to listen to the programs from the BBC World Service on 15400. Once again, this comes from Ascension Islands to West Africa. So nice little frequency there. Probably for me, one of the best Voice of America frequencies. Not there are a few others, but they change. This one, 15580, is like the rock solid frequency that they never change. It's always there. Most of the time comes from the Botswana transmitter side in Africa, and packs a great signal. I'm actually listening to it right now as I'm posting the video. I just was listening to Voice of America on this frequency. It was interesting. They were talking about what happened in Turkey at that wedding where that 12-year-old kamikaze got blown up. So interesting. Listen, usually does give in quite a good signal, even though it comes from Botswana in Africa. So take a listen if you want to listen to the Voice of America. Of course, one of the frequencies that's been there for ages also. 15720 Radio New Zealand. This is I call this my summer evening or my summer bedtime radio listening. Why? Because 15720 doesn't come in the winter times in Montreal. It's a summer radio listening for me. So usually starts coming in around the month early May, and will be there in the evening up to early September. So for me, it is that warm summer evening listening on the balcony, or bedtime listening also if I'm a little tired with the portable radio. So anywhere from here in the East Coast here in Montreal, it usually comes in starting around 0300 hours UT until the end of its program at 0500 UT when they change frequency. 15770, good frequency for WRMI, is another great listen for me because of its various programming, its relays of Radio France, of Glenn Hauser's World of Radio, of all sorts of programmings that you can hear. That's another frequency I like. 17840 is the last one for the international broadcast that I talk about. It's also a frequency been used for many years, and depending on propagation and also time of year, because this is also mostly a summer listening for me, Radio Australia usually comes in quite well, 2100 hours UTC, up to, well, it depends on propagation And of course, it depends on where you are. West Coast usually has a much stronger signal on that frequency than the East Coast. So it all depends on propagation and time of year. So that's my list of my favorite frequencies. Maybe you have some that you're thinking, oh, you missed out on this one or this one. Why not tell me your list of international broadcasts that you enjoy and, share your thoughts. Remember, I chose these frequencies because these are the ones that are always the same. If I wanted to talk about my favorite broadcasters, it would be a little different. I would post my favorite broadcasters instead. So this is my top international frequency list. Why? Because in 6 months or in a year or in a year and a half, probably all these frequencies will still be valid because they are pretty much all the standard frequencies used all the time from these stations. Hope you enjoyed this video. Of course, more to come on lists of my favorite frequencies depending on what type of programming I want to listen to, and shortwave has a lot of interesting stuff to listen to. So if you enjoyed the videos, please subscribe, give us thumbs up, and thank you so much for following us on this channel.